Well, the draw for the group stages of the Champions League takes place this Thursday, 31st of August. All bar 6 teams are known when it comes to those clubs set to be drawn in Monaco. And this week, we will find out the last half a dozen sides that will contest an autumn campaign in Europe's premier club competition. This is Betting Weekly Extra Time, Champions League edition. And in terms of midweek action, the handle for the Champions League is always significant. Globally, everyone has an opinion. You're with Dan Roebuck, and alongside me, two of the shrewdest handicappers around to talk you through the Tuesday and Wednesday card across Europe. Steve Wyss is back after a winning midweek last week, while Will White, who toppled James Easton on the European show at the weekend, is also alongside us this week. Steve, you did carve out a profit last week. It wasn't easy, as RJ and others found out, but nonetheless, you turned in a profit.
Yeah, I was pretty pleased to go 3-0, Dan. I was still moaning though, wasn't I, because of that late goal which Braga conceded, which denied me the full winner on the handicap there. But yeah, look, honestly, it's a tough competition, so I was delighted to get through with some winners. Maybe I was a little bit lucky because, I would have taken that Maccabi Haifa over if RJ had not been on it. So it's the luck of the draw sometimes. A word about RJ. I thought he was really unlucky with the Rakoff match.
Oh,
VAR.
did you see the goal that was disallowed? He did.
Well, I think it was like a toenail, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, VAR. That's a debate for another day. But I thought he was really unlucky, and I don't really think it was really hard to foresee that Maccabi Young Boys game, how both teams operated in it. So he'll be back swinging next time he's on. But I'll take the winners when they come, Dan, because it's a tough competition.
Will, great to have you on this week. You did turn in plus week, a profitable week, when we had you on at the start of the third round of qualifiers. You did say in the WhatsApp group, roll on the group stages. Why is it so different? Is it just the bigger teams? Do we just know more about them? Is the form solid, more reliable metrics? Why the group stages so different as far as you're concerned to these playoff games?
It's great to be back, and I'm looking forward to tackling what is quite a tricky card, as Steve says at first glance. The group stage is where the bigger teams from the bigger European leagues tend to enter the competition. Just they suit my betting style a bit better, really, because we're talking about teams that I model and watch and know quite a lot about week in, week out, and obviously, when you've got a higher level of confidence in your numbers and in your own opinion and judgment, it makes it a more attractive betting proposition. So that's why I'd look forward to the group stages. And another thing I'd like to say is I'd always advise aspiring bettors to try and streamline and specialize the leagues and maybe even more specifically the teams that they focus on, because it can be difficult to follow all of the nuances around team news and motivation and styles of play and matchups and data if you do expand your repertoire to too many leagues.
What I find really difficult with European football, and I'll put this question to both of you, if you are dominant in your domestic league, and that could be an Antwerp or a Molde or a Galatasaray, you have an awful lot of the ball, you play a certain style, usually have more possession, usually create more chances. That's your bread and butter week in, week out. Suddenly you're thrust into a Champions League group against sides that do that in their own domestic league, but at a higher level. So do they have to change their style because they can't play the way that they play in their domestic division? And how does that affect ratings and bets that you have? Because when Galatasaray play at home to pretty much any side in the Turkish league, they will be the dominant force. But suddenly, if they are inviting Manchester City or Barcelona, Real Madrid, they have to change their style. How difficult is it for bettors to try and work out how Gala might approach those type of games?
It's extremely difficult. I think actually quite a big tell into that factor you're describing is how the betting markets move in those early group stage games, where perhaps you've got a team like Galatasaray paying a PSG or a Man City, and bettors might look at that thinking that Gala have got a chance because of their attacking threats. And then you see the Asian handicap market on day of game move strongly towards the big team. It makes you think, and really it is really difficult for those bigger, especially the more attacking lower league European teams to adapt to being on the back foot and perhaps adopting a more defensive approach. So yeah, definitely something to get some feedback from the betting markets on before you start to adjust your approach accordingly.
Steve, do you look at the markets in games like that? Obviously, I know you follow quite a lot of the lesser leagues in Europe, certainly the Scandinavian leagues, and obviously you can be so dominant in those leagues some years, but you have to change your style of play as soon as you get into Europe. I mean, Copenhagen were an interesting example last year with all the draws they had in the group stages. I mean, how do you assess teams in situations like that?
Do you have to change your style of play? Because it was really refreshing when the champions of Norway, Bodø Glimt, were doing so well in the Conference League and Europa League, and they didn't change their style at all. They did take a pasting or two eventually, but that was refreshing to see. It does frustrate me when, like in Scandinavia down the years, someone like Malmo, really dominant domestically, and then just go into their complete shell in Europe, and that's frustrating. I've seen the Scottish sides do it as well, almost because they feel like they have to do it. But I suppose there is this sense to it as well, because you don't want to get beaten 6 or 7 by someone like a Barcelona. So that's when you've got to know the manager, how the manager's going to approach it. Some managers are kind of old school and will do that. But the more modern thinking bosses in this era, I think, are more inclined to stick with their general strategy and approach, because I don't think teams are as interchangeable as they used to be. I think everyone now in football tries to have their own defined style, and they try and stick with it as much as they can.
That's very true. We do see teams try and play the way that they play domestically on the European stage. It can be difficult, certainly things to consider when playing in the European games and competitions. Okay, let's get to some selections, shall we? We've got 5 picks across 4 games from the boys here. We're going to kick off with Tuesday action. Galatasaray against Molde. Galatasaray -167, Molde +400, draw +310 here. They're all 3 o'clock Eastern times, incidentally, midweek, as they were last week for the playoffs games. Gala were plus money winners in Norway, Steve, but they were the favourites. They did leave it late. I mean, I know they're very short at -167 here, but that wouldn't put me off, for example. What's your take on this game?
Yeah, I was pleased that the bet I had on the game last week of the over 2.75 goals came in, because it was more that field bet. Like I said, it was cashed by half time, near enough. And I'm sticking with the same play, over 2.75 goals at +100. And it was going to be over 3. I was going to take the over 3 goal line, but the market has moved towards the under, actually. Not quite sure why, but there's no reason why this match shouldn't be played in a similar fashion to last week. Molde will certainly go down swinging. This is their opportunity to make the group stages. I thought they were very unlucky to lose, actually. I thought they were the better team. But what the difference was that Galatasaray just had a little bit extra quality, especially in the final third. Icardi, I thought, was the main difference maker. And, he's often forgotten about. He didn't have the greatest of times in Paris, but this is someone, very experienced striker. And, put him on this sort of stage, he can stand out like a sore thumb, really. So I look at this Galatasaray squad, and that's where they have bits of a lot more individual quality than Molde. Now, they should protect a 1-goal lead now playing at home, but they'll get opportunities on the break, because Molde at some point will definitely have a good go, leave themselves exposed. I think Galatasaray could cover this goal line on their own if Molde do stupid things. But I do expect the visitors to contribute. I think there's a good chance of both teams scoring. I did consider BTTS, actually, instead. But again, a 1-1 draw. And I know I said this about Servette Rangers, and it lost. But a 1-1 draw does not do Molde any good whatsoever. So if that happened, then logically there should be all sorts of chances towards the end of the game. So that's why, again, I'm leaning towards the goal line over. Again, I'm ignoring the stats of Galatasaray home matches in recent times. The way the game was played last week, I just don't see how things change. I really don't, unless Galatasaray just suddenly really tighten up. But even if that happens, then I think they can pick off Molde on the counter-attack and score a few themselves. So if it ain't broke, why fix it, Dan? So we'll stick with that same bet, exact same price, exact same line as last week. Galatasaray versus Molde, over 2.75 goals at plus 100. And in terms of match result, yeah, unfortunately, I will have to lean towards Galatasaray winning it. Maybe something like 3-1, 2-1. But I will deep down be rooting for Molde, of course.
Of course you will be. Neither side played at the weekend. Does it matter in these games? I've seen quite a lot of teams taking a weekend off, and obviously the various football federations have allowed them to do that to prepare for European games. Does it work? Is it a factor for you? I mean, obviously they sort of cancel each other out with these two, Steve.
I think it's a great idea, and most federations are doing this now. They want to give their teams the best possible.
Apart from England, of course.
Well, I know, yeah, yeah. It's the presumption is that we're the English are too good, right? They don't need the break, but it will help both teams out for sure. And worth mentioning that the Turkish coefficient has nosedived in recent years, and they really do need a team back in the group stages of Europe. The Norwegian coefficient has been improving, And I think one of the reasons it has been improving is because they've been doing this schedule. They do it for all their teams, whether it's Conference League or Champions League, give them that best chance to qualify. Both will be well rested and bang up for the game. And I think that will help goals because the freshness is there.
And Will, just to you on that point as well, because we've talked previously when we did the European show at the weekend about teams having to play more games. And we were talking about Osasuna, who denied us both. I followed you in with Valencia yesterday. But does it cancel each other out when you say, okay, well, both teams haven't played? We're going to get onto your Young Boys-Maccabi Haifa pick in a bit. You think, well, they're both not playing, so I don't factor it in. What's your thoughts on teams missing out on weekend play ahead of European games?
I think I agree with Steve. I think it's a good thing, and I can see why federations do it for sure. From a how do I factor it in perspective, I'd only really factor it in if there's a difference between both teams participating. And in this case, and in all the cases here, apart from did Rangers play over the weekend?
Yes, Rangers did play and win. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at two teams that have both had the benefit of extended rest and preparation time, it doesn't really factor into my thinking at all. It's only if there's a difference that I consider it.
Well, Young Boys-Maccabi Haifa neither played at the weekend in Switzerland or Israel. This is the game that you're going to tackle for us here. Minus 127 Young Boys-Maccabi Haifa at plus 310. Again, it's Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. Young Boys in fair form at the moment, and this is their first European tie. Of course, what's the angle in? What's the pick here, Will?
Actually, when I first looked at this game, I thought when I first looked at the tie before the first leg, I really thought it looked like two attacking teams and lots of goals. Young Boys are just one of those teams I think everybody thinks they're just a very attack-minded team, and there are going to be inherently lots of goals in their games, and that's backed up by the whopping 130 goals that were seen in their 36 league games last season in the Swiss league. That's 3.61 goals a game, which is outrageous, really. But I'm actually going to be betting under 2.75 goals here. I think generally in betting, the best bets often feel the most counterintuitive and sometimes even uncomfortable. It's the betting the big underdogs on the big handicaps and the under 4.25 goals that often really get the adrenaline pumping. In this case, my main angle in is the first leg and the game state. It was a very, very cagey 0-0 draw, and the XG was extremely low. The total 0.54 goals worth of chances were created on the expected goals. And I can't help but think that neither team's going to want to open up too early. I don't actually think there's much difference between the quality of both teams here, and I think Young Boys are a little bit too short on the money line and the Asian. Potentially would lean Maccabi on the plus 3/4 goals. A little bit short for me at the moment. I think overall, kind of similar to what we were discussing earlier, Dan. I don't think necessarily this attack-minded domestic league young boys is what we're going to be seeing in European competition. I know then Maccabi Haifa aren't necessarily one of the bigger European names, but in last season's Conference League qualification stages, Young Boys went out to Anderlecht on penalties after 2 1-0 games, which perhaps does suggest that when it gets to the real big stage, they do slightly change up their style to accommodate. So all things considered, I think the line should be closer to 2.5 goals here. I know that unders bets aren't necessarily popular on these shows, but I'm going to take a punt on the under 2.75 at -114.
I love an unders. Don't worry about that. I know
I
Steve doesn't.
do.
Do you?
I added a couple. This is why we've got the likes of Will on the show, because we wouldn't have any unders bets if it weren't for Will and Nigel Seeley. Although Jack sometimes pops in with an under, doesn't he? But you know what? I think this is a really good bet. I sense from Will it's not just a stats bet. I think there's a bit of feel in this as well, because
does a plastic pitch come into it at all with Young Boys? I mean, there must be enough plastic pitches in. I say plastic, that's quite derogatory, isn't it? I mean, the artificial surfaces these days, nearly every single certainly Premier League team trains on them, and they're quite good, aren't they? So maybe it's not a factor.
I actually went past this state. I was actually visiting Switzerland this summer. I went past the Wankdorf Stadium here in Bern, and it was. I was wondering, will I be talking about them on any shows this season in the Champions League? And here I am. What I thought happened last week was we had 2 teams who suddenly realised where the hell they were. We're 1 tie away from the group stages of the Champions League, and they went into their shell and they got scared. I think this has the makings of going all the way to penalties. Penalty kicks from me, Dan, in this tie.
Unders we like. Panathinaikos Braga next. This is a game on Tuesday as well, 3 p.m. as they all are, as I've mentioned. Panathinaikos plus 150, Sporting Braga plus 175. So tight in the money line here. Will just on, and Steve touched on coefficients. I was just looking at the sort of trend for Greek teams when it comes to UEFA coefficients. And if you go back 20 years, they were ranked about 6th or 7th. They've slipped down to, I think, 14th now when it comes to their clubs in European football. There is this perception, and it can get into bettors' mindsets, that you go to Greece, it's a hard place to go, and you can see the reasoning, and you sort of rely on almost a bit of a myth. I don't know if it's a myth these days, but, going to Olympiacos or Panathinaikos, AEK Athens, and it's very, very difficult with a hot crowd and so on. I'm not quite sure it's a thing anymore, and the Greek coefficient has slipped down quite a lot. I mean, are Greek teams, still to be feared, do you think? And do you factor that in when you're looking at prices for money line and goals and so on, when you look at a game involving a Greek team at home in Europe?
It's funny you actually mentioned that. I did actually go back last night and I found a research paper on the subject of home advantage in domestic European competition from 2020, so kind of pre-COVID times. And that paper actually found that the European league with the highest home advantage rate was the Greek Super League.
I take it all back.
Which did actually surprise me. I guess the question is, does that still, if it was previously a myth, translate to European competition? And I think there are factors that you could consider that would back that up. And you mentioned one of them, the strong home support that they get. Is it a factor in this tie? I think so. Yeah, I think Braga are very strong at home, and I know Steve was on them last week. I don't think they travel particularly well either, Braga. So I think guns ahead, I'd be on Panathinaikos on the draw no bet line here. I think they should be very slight favourites at home, especially considering game state here. I think you've got to build that in a little bit too. But to my bet, my bet is going to be on over 2.5 goals, -115. Game state does come into my thinking, where Braga are up 2-1 from the first leg. An extremely high XG score on the first leg, 3.07 total goals. Braga are just full of attacking threats, aren't they? With Abel Ruiz, Ricardo Horta, Bruma, Pizzi, And at the same time, we've got Panathinaikos, who some people may think that Greek teams like to sit back and defend and play quite defensively. Well, that might be the case if this were 0-0, but it's not. They're 2-1 behind. They're going to have to open up. They need to score at least once. I'm not sure they're just going to sit back. So that perception of Greek teams being inherently defensive-minded, I don't think is relevant here, really. One other factor I really like for the overs here is Braga's screening midfield. Al-Bazrati is out for this leg with a sprained ankle. I think this will weaken Braga significantly defensively, and I think they'll know they can't just sit back and try and contain Panathinaikos. So I can see Pana pushing and Braga looking to hit them on the break. They've got lots of threats on the counter, and I think over 2.5 goals at -115 is a pretty solid bet.
That is a selection in the Panathinaikos Sporting Prague game. We've got one match to cover on Wednesday. It is AEK Athens against Antwerp with the Greek side -129, Antwerp +335. The Belgian side draw +450 here. Have I got that the other way around? I have to check that. Both handicappers have a pick in this fixture. I thought it was the hardest one to call, having just been across it a little bit last week. One for me to swerve, and that's because I'm asking the questions and not giving the selections. So Steve and Will have both got a pick in this. Steve, you're at first. What do you like?
Well, my bet for the game is going to be AEK Athens on a -0.75 Asian handicap at +105. And I've only got 2 picks this week. That's how hard I found this card. I forgot to say this at the start of the show that I actually believe I would tread lightly in terms of your staking for this round because I've just got a feeling it's really difficult to predict. I am more confident about the Molde bet. This almost feels weird to be betting on a Greek team. I've not rated that league for quite some time, but I think it is improving. I will hold my hands up a little bit. Panathinaikos were better than I expected against Braga last week. And by the way, I think Panathinaikos at +220 to qualify against Braga could be a big price. But in this game, I do expect AEK Athens to go through the tie. I watched them against Zagreb. And again, I think I underestimated the Greek champions, really. I expected Dinamo to have too much for them overall. But they found a way through. A couple of late goals in stoppage time. Last week, I was surprised they lost, actually, in Belgium. I looked at the stats for this game. I saw the highlights, and they did dominate. They somehow didn't score. Not sure quite how. They had a really high XG. But they should turn that around here at home. I don't actually think Royal Antwerp, to give them their full title, a particularly great side. I don't profess to follow Belgian football in great detail, but I think the best team in Belgium is Club Brugge.
They nicked the title very late on, didn't they, Antwerp?
It was a 3-way, but I think 3 teams were winning the title in the last 5 minutes of regulation last season over there. But yeah, I do think Club Brugge are their best team domestically, and they're actually in the Conference League. How good Royal Antwerp are remains to be seen in Europe. They're very inexperienced at this level in terms of the club anyway. They've got some players, like Toby Alderweireld, and that's probably helped them win the title over there. Vincent Janssen, who, again, he flopped in the Premier League, but he does a really good job in Belgium. I think this has the makings of, at very worst, going to extra time for AEK Athens. So that's why I'm going to take the home team on this handicap. You could just take them on the money line if you wanted, but I'm the sort of bettor who will always look to try and get a price closer to the even money mark. So that's why I'm taking the -0.75 Asian handicap. I'm going to kind of take a leaf out of your textbook here, Dan. Greece, the tough place to go. Will has said that in some of his
Where's
stats.
hang on a minute. Hang on. Wait there. Just wait a minute. That's a yellow.
A yellow?
That's a yellow for that. Go on.
For denigrating the stats and the research paper, I agree.
No, I love the research paper.
It is a tough place to go. The crowd will be right on top of Royal Antwerp here, and if they come out of this tie and qualify, I'll say fair play to them. I think AEK Athens go through. I'm not massive on it because Will said, didn't he? Some of the better bets in soccer, perhaps ones that make you feel uncomfortable. And this does make me feel uncomfortable. It's not. I don't like taking sides anyway. I'm a goals backer. That's where I do my best work. So that in itself makes me think, and also actually backing a Greek team isn't something I particularly have been doing in recent years. But this is the side that I think will qualify. So I've got to back my judgment here. Minus 0.75 Asian handicap at plus 100. I think there's probably a good chance of a half win exactly. This could well go to extra time as well. But a winning bet is better than nothing, isn't it? So AEK Athens, come on the Greeks, come on the Greeks.
Toby Alderweireld, incidentally, 90th minute equaliser to basically win the title away at Racing Genk back in June. Will, what's your play in this one? You have steered away from the money line. You're going goals. What's your pick?
Yeah, I think this just highlights how difficult I found this card. Really, it really is tricky because Steve's predominantly a goals better. I'm predominantly an Asian handicap or moneyline better, so I don't normally get involved in goals, and yet I've got 3 goal selections for this card. So I've really had to dig deep and kind of go outside of my comfort zone a little bit. I think there's a good chance Antwerp do get on the score sheet here, and so I would have sided with Athens on the Asian handicap, but given, I think Antwerp are quite an underrated attacking threat. Actually, they've only failed to score in 1 out of 6 competitive matches so far this season, and I'm not completely convinced by this Athens defense. So I've targeted the goal line here on over 2.5 goals, minus 117. I think one factor we haven't necessarily alluded to is that the second leg qualification ties normally are more open, especially if one team's chasing the game. And it sounds simple and it sounds obvious, but you've got to adjust your goal expectations accordingly. Some people may look at this first leg and where it finished 1-0 Antwerp and think, quite a cagey defensive game, but it wasn't really that. There were 2.99 expected goals in that first leg, and so Athens really should have got on the score sheet at least once. If we look back to the previous round as well of AEKs against Dinamo Zagreb, as Steve alluded to, that's the second leg in that tie finished 2-2 with 11 shots on target. So AEK do have history of opening up in these second legs. I think there's a lot of attacking talent on both sides. I think on the last show I talked about Levi Garcia, who scored 14 goals in the Greek Super League last season. And then, as Steve mentioned, Antwerp have Vincent Janssen, who's on good form this season, scoring 4-4 in the Belgian Jupiler Pro League. I've actually got down here a 2-1 type scoreline and extra time. So I think Steve and I are quite aligned here. I think we both take 3-1 over 2-1, but yeah, I'll be backing over 2.5 goals at minus 117.
Good stuff. That's the selections out of the way. Top work from both. By the way, I thought the easiest game to call, surely PS3 Rangers. It's got to be an overs game, hasn't it, Steve? Surely. Plus 155 over 3.5. We're not going goals in Rangers. It's been the theme over the qualifiers.
The thing is, I actually believe that Rangers will come here and try and park the bus, right? I think they'll try and play the game differently. And even if they fall behind, I don't think they'll try and necessarily change their game until it's later. So, yeah, difficult one, really, Dan. I prefer leave it alone.
Okay, what's your ratings for that game? Am I going to do my money, Will, if I go over 3.5 for the PSV Rangers game? What's your thoughts on that one? Yes, I'm going to do my money, isn't it? That pause.
I can see where you're coming from, but
too obvious.
As soon as I looked at the lines there, I couldn't have anything to do with PSV or overs. I would need minus 0.75 on the Asian to be with PSV and probably a line around 2.75 to even consider overs, and we're at least a quarter of a goal away on both. So I can see where you're coming from, Dan, but I do remember previous Rangers away games in Europe and them sitting back, as Steve mentions, and so yeah, not one for me.
Okay, note to self, leave the opinions to the experts. Let's get a reminder of the selection. Steve, your picks for this playoff round, second leg week in Europe.
Molde versus Galatasaray. Sorry, Galatasaray versus Molde over 2.75 goals at plus 100. and AEK Athens on the minus 0.75 Asian handicap at plus 105.
Will, you've got 3 for us. Just rattle them off.
I've got Young Boys-Maccabi Haifa under 2.75 goals at minus 114. So if there are 3 goals, we lose only the half stake there. Panathinaikos Braga over 2.5 goals minus 115, and AEK Athens versus Antwerp over 2.5 goals at minus 117.
Great stuff. And just for fun, before we wrap it up, 12 teams left in the qualifiers, 6 go through, obviously. Just for fun, as I say, which team, which club of the size that we've looked at a few of the games, but that are involved in those playoffs, do you think might sort of make any impression when it comes to the group stages? Steve, you got any thoughts? Could it be a Galatasaray? Could it be a PSV? Might it be a Molde? What's your thoughts on a team maybe to follow who might not just be also-rans should they get through at the group stages?
Yeah, it pains me to say it, Dan, but Galatasaray, I think, could be a team that go quite well. First of all, I think they've got a very good chance of making the group stages after the first leg. They will be in pot 4 of the... You've got to look at the draw here, and I actually look at pot 3, and there's some teams I wouldn't mind facing. The likes of Red Star Belgrade, Shakhtar Donetsk, possibly even Red Bull Salzburg. It's not too bad. Whereas in pot 4, you've got Newcastle in there, Union Berlin, Lens, sides that have not been in Europe recently. That's why they're so lowly ranked. And the other thing is, someone like a Braga or a PSV. PSV would not be able to face, for me, the weakest team in pot 1, which is Feyenoord. Braga can't face the likes of Benfica and Porto, who, they're decent sides, but you would much rather face them from pot 1 or 2 rather than your big dogs like your Real Madrids and Man Uniteds, Man Cities of this world. So I think, just saying, if all the stars aligned, you could get a group containing Feyenoord, Porto, Red Star Belgrade and Galatasaray. They'd have a chance in that group, I think, of qualifying. So I'm going to have to go with them, I think.
Ratings-wise, Will, what do your numbers suggest when it comes to those battling to make the group stages of the Champions League? Which team might be able to punch up and punch above its weight, do you think, when it comes to those group stages in the autumn?
I think it's only really PSV that figures for me. I've got them definitely the highest rated of the remaining, and Galatasaray second highest. But there's quite a significant difference between the two. And if you look at the Europa League, was it Europa League semis from last? No, it wasn't semis. Was it quarters? Where PSV played Sevilla last season in Europa League?
Yeah.
If you look at the markets there, PSV are actually the slightly favoured team, even though they didn't go through. So PSV are kind of on that Sevilla type level, and I don't think you could say the same about Galatasaray. So yeah, I think it could only be PSV for me, although I wouldn't be surprised if Steve's knowledge of Galatasaray and the upswing in Turkish football, as well as the knowledge of the draw and the pots, is throws up a surprise.
We'll get to know the group stages, of course, later this week. Fingers crossed for all of the picks when it comes to the Tuesday and Wednesday games. That wraps up Betting Weekly Extra Time Champions League edition. Don't forget, take advantage of all of the in-play markets with Bet Rivers as well. Many thanks to Steve and to Will and from myself, Dan Roebuck. It is goodbye. We'll speak again soon.